The sun dipped low over the wide Arizona plains, turning the dust in the air into gold. The wind whispered through the mesquite trees, carrying with it the faint smell of smoke and earth. A young farmer, quiet by nature and gentle in his ways, stood beside his wooden fence watching the horizon. Life had been lonely on that stretch of land. He worked from dawn to dusk, plowing, planting, and tending his small herd, with only the whistling wind for company. His hands were rough, his face weathered, and his heart was simple, shaped by the quiet rhythm of the frontier. He never looked for trouble, never sought out strangers. But that day, something, or someone, was about to change his life forever. She appeared like a shadow stepping out of the dying light. The figure moved slowly, wrapped in a blanket of deer hide, her long black hair trailing over her shoulders. The farmer froze, his hand resting on the wooden gate. He had seen Indians before, from a distance mostly, trading or passing through. But this woman walked straight toward him, calm and sure, as if she had crossed both land and fear to reach that very spot. Her dark eyes held no hesitation. She looked at him as if he owed her something she had already decided to claim. When she spoke, her voice carried both strength and sorrow. "You are the one who lives alone," she said softly. The farmer nodded, unsure what to say. She watched him carefully, studying every detail, his hands, his face, his home. Then she asked the question that made his throat tighten and his breath falter. "So white people make children this way?" She said in a tone that was not mocking, but deeply curious. "Can I try too?" The word struck him harder than a rifle shot. He didn't understand at first if she was serious or teasing, if it was a misunderstanding of language or something deeper. Her face, though calm, showed no sign of playfulness. There was an innocence behind her boldness, a kind of searching pain that made her question sound more human than strange. He could see she had walked far, her clothes worn, her skin marked by sun and travel. She looked tired but proud, the kind of pride that doesn't bend easily. He stepped back a little, unsure if he should speak or stay silent. "Ma'am," he said gently, "you must be mistaken. I don't know what you mean." She tilted her head as if puzzled by his reaction. "I saw how your people live," she continued. "The women hold babies. The men stay near them. My tribe told me this is how your kind brings new life. I want that too. I want what they have." Her voice didn't tremble. She wasn't ashamed of what she said. To her, the words carried no sin or shame, only a direct truth. But to the farmer, it was a world of confusion. He had never spoken to a woman like this, let alone one from a tribe known for fierce independence. He looked around, half expecting someone to appear, maybe a husband, a warrior, a trick. But there was no one, only the wind and the sound of a hawk circling overhead. He noticed then a scar along her arm, half hidden beneath her blanket. She had known hardship, that much was clear, and her eyes, deep, dark, and steady, told of someone who had seen too much loss for her age. Still, there was a light inside them, something that pulled at his heart even as he fought to stay composed. "You're hurt," he finally said. "Come inside. You can rest." She hesitated as if unsure whether to trust him. Then, slowly, she nodded and followed. Inside the small cabin, the air smelled of wood smoke and bread. The fire in the hearth flickered against the walls, throwing a soft glow on the simple table and a lone chair. The farmer poured her some water, but she didn't drink right away. Instead, she looked around, studying the objects, the tools, the small mirror, the Bible on the shelf. Each thing was foreign to her, yet fascinating. She touched the edge of the mirror with a finger and stared at her reflection like she was seeing another world inside it. "You live alone," she said again, more like a statement than a question. He nodded. "Since my parents passed," he replied quietly. "It's been just me and the land." She seemed to understand. "In my tribe, no one lives alone. Even the widows have the camp. You are strange, but strong." She looked at him again, and he felt her eyes search him, not in a cruel way, but as if she was trying to understand the kind of man he was. Outside, the evening turned darker. The sound of coyotes rose in the distance. He set a piece of bread before her, but she didn't eat. Instead, she asked softly, "Do you fear me?" He shook his head, though he wasn't sure it was true. Something about her presence unsettled him. Not from danger, but from the feeling she brought. Something wild and ancient pressing against his quiet, settled life. "No," he said. "But I don't understand you." She smiled faintly. "Then listen, and you will." She told him how her village had been struck by sickness, how many had died, and how she had lost the child she was meant to have. Her words were steady, but her eyes shimmered with old grief. "The spirits took what was mine," she said. "So I came to seek new life. Your people have different ways. Maybe your ways can give me what mine could not." The farmer felt a lump in his throat. He wanted to speak, to tell her that life didn't work that way, that no person could just decide such a thing. But he saw the pain in her expression, and something in him softened. He looked at her differently now, not as a stranger, not as an Indian woman out of place, but as a human being searching for hope in a world that had taken too much from her. The firelight flickered across her face, and for a brief moment, their eyes met in silent understanding. The question she had asked earlier hung in the air between them, heavy and unanswered. He finally said, "You don't know what you're asking." She replied, "Then teach me." Her tone was not stubborn but sincere, as if she believed that by understanding his world, she could mend the broken pieces of her own. The room fell silent. Outside, the wind rose and beat softly against the cabin walls. He turned toward the fire, his mind torn between reason and something deeper. He wasn't used to being looked at this way, as though someone saw beyond the surface of his quiet existence. She was fierce, brave, and painfully honest, and though her words had shocked him, he couldn't push her away. There was something pure in her wish, something that reached past the boundaries of race or culture. The simple human desire to belong, to rebuild, to feel life again after loss. The silence stretched, and she waited for him to speak, but he didn't. The only sound was the faint crackle of burning wood. Then suddenly a distant noise broke the stillness. Horses maybe, or riders moving fast through the valley. She stiffened, her eyes flashing with alarm. "They are coming," she whispered. "If they find me here, they will not let me live." He stood frozen, unsure what danger she meant, but before he could ask, she gripped his arm with trembling fingers. "Promise me you will hide me," she said. "Promise me you will not let them take me." The fire flickered, the sound outside grew louder, and in that moment, the farmer realized his quiet life was about to change forever. He didn't know who was coming or why this woman had chosen his home as her refuge, but the fear in her eyes was real, and her plea would pull him into a storm far greater than he could imagine. The farmer's heart pounded as the sound of hooves grew clearer. The night outside had turned black, the wind carrying the faint echo of men shouting somewhere in the distance. The woman's hand still gripped his arm, her strength surprising for someone who looked so worn. Her eyes darted toward the small window as if she could already see the riders coming down the hill. Without saying another word, he moved quickly to the back of the cabin, pointing toward a trapdoor that led to the small root cellar beneath the floorboards. It wasn't much of a hiding place, but it would have to do. "Down there," he whispered. "Stay quiet until I say it's safe." She hesitated for a moment, her face tense with both pride and fear. "They are not your men," she said softly. "They hunt me." He didn't ask why. He just nodded and lifted the wooden hatch. She climbed down, vanishing into the darkness below, and he lowered the door gently, spreading an old rug over it. Then he grabbed his lantern and walked to the door just as the sound of horses stopped outside his fence. 3 riders appeared in the flickering light, their outlines dark against the night sky. They wore coats dusted with trail grit, rifles slung across their saddles. One of them called out, "Evenin', farmer. You seen anyone pass through here? A woman, Apache wrapped in hide, been running this way?" The farmer's stomach tightened, but he kept his face steady. "No one's come this way," he answered calmly. The men exchanged glances, clearly unconvinced. One of them dismounted, boots crunching over dry dirt. "Mind if we take a look inside?" the man asked. The farmer didn't move at first. He knew refusal could raise suspicion, but letting them in might end worse. He finally stepped aside, his voice even. "Go ahead." The man pushed open the door and stepped inside, scanning the small cabin with sharp eyes. The place was clean and quiet, the fire low, a single chair by the hearth. "You live alone?" the man asked. "Always have," the farmer said. The rider looked around once more, then sniffed the air. "Strange," he muttered. "Someone's been burning sage. Smells like Apache medicine." The farmer felt a rush of panic but stayed composed. "Picked it up in town last week," he lied. "Said it keeps the flies away." The man studied him for a long moment before shrugging. "Maybe so," he said finally, stepping back outside. The other 2 turned their horses toward the trail. "She won't get far," one said. "If she's smart, she'll head south. If she's not, she'll die out here." They rode off, their voices fading into the dark, the sound of hooves echoing through the valley until all was quiet again. When the silence settled, The farmer knelt and lifted the trapdoor. The Apache woman looked up, her face pale but calm. "They are gone," he whispered. She climbed out slowly, brushing dust from her blanket. Her gaze met his, filled with gratitude but also something else. Shame, perhaps, for needing his help. "You didn't have to lie for me," she said. "If they find out, they will hurt you too." He shook his head. "I couldn't let them take you," he said. "You didn't deserve that." She sat down near the fire, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for warmth. For a while, neither spoke. The crackle of the fire filled the silence. Then she looked at him and said, "You don't even know who I am." He sat across from her, his face soft in the firelight. "Then tell me." She nodded slowly, her expression distant, as if she were seeing memories play before her eyes. "My people once lived near the river that runs through the Red Canyon," she began. "The land was good there. My father was a medicine man, my mother a healer. When the soldiers came, they said the land was no longer ours. They burned our homes and sent us walking to a dry place where the water was bitter. Many died on that trail, old ones, little ones. I was only a girl then." Her voice stayed calm, but her eyes glistened. "When I grew older, I was promised to a warrior who fought the soldiers. But he never came back. I waited until waiting became a wound that would not close." The farmer listened silently, feeling the weight of her story. Out here, everyone carried scars, some seen, some buried deep. "I don't blame your people," he said quietly. "Most of us farmers never asked for trouble. We just wanted land to live on." She looked at him with a sad smile. "Land," she repeated. "That is what all men fight for. Land or the right to raise children upon it. My tribe says a woman without children is like a tree that never blooms. I thought if I learned your people's ways, maybe I could bloom again." Her words hung in the air, heavy and honest. The farmer didn't know how to answer. He wasn't a man of many words, but he could feel the truth of what she said. Life on the frontier was harsh. Loss was common, and dreams often died before they could take root. He looked at her and saw not just an outsider, but someone broken in the same quiet way he was. He finally said, "You shouldn't stay here long. If those men come back, it'll mean trouble for both of us." She nodded but made no move to leave. "I will go when the sun rises," she said softly. "Just let me rest until then." He agreed, though something in him didn't want her to leave. He went to fetch a blanket, spreading it near the fire. When he returned, she had fallen asleep, her face peaceful for the first time. Through the night, the farmer sat awake, staring into the flames. The words she had spoken echoed in his mind. So white people make children this way. "Can I try too?" He realized now that it hadn't just been curiosity, it had been despair, a desperate attempt to belong to life again. He thought of the loneliness in his own heart, the empty table, the years that passed without laughter. He had buried his hopes the way he buried his parents, quietly and alone. By dawn, the light crept through the cracks of the cabin walls. The woman stirred, blinking against the pale glow. Outside, the valley looked peaceful again, the chaos of the night gone as if it had never happened. She stood and walked to the window, gazing toward the distant hills. "They will keep searching," she said. "If they find me, they will say I betrayed them." He frowned. "Why would they say that?" "Because I left," she replied. "Because I wanted to learn what your people know. To them it means I have turned away from the old ways. But I only wanted to understand, to find what makes life worth living again." Her voice cracked slightly, the first sign of her pain showing through her strength. The farmer walked to the doorway, watching the rising sun stretch across the land. "Maybe you don't have to go back," he said quietly. She turned toward him, surprise flickering in her eyes. "If you stay here, no one will find you. You can help with the crops, the animals. You'll have a place." Her lips parted as if she wanted to answer, but she didn't. Instead, she looked away, torn between worlds. "Your kindness is a heavy gift," she said. "But I carry danger with me. If I stay, they might burn your land the way they burned mine." He didn't argue. He only nodded, knowing she might be right. Yet deep down, something had already changed. The quiet man who once kept to himself now felt a stirring inside, a need to protect, to understand, to stand beside her no matter the risk. When she finally stepped outside, the morning light caught her hair, turning it copper against the rising sun. She walked toward the corral where his mare stood still and calm. The farmer followed a few paces behind, unsure what he wanted to say. She reached out and gently touched the horse's neck, whispering something in her own tongue. The animal relaxed under her hand as though it understood. He watched her, realizing that she didn't just belong to the wild, she carried its spirit within her. She turned back to him and said, "You have a good heart." "That is why I came here," he frowned. "You came here for me?" She nodded slowly. "The spirits guided me. They told me I would find life where there was silence. Maybe they meant this place. Maybe they meant you." Her words sent a strange warmth through him, though neither spoke further. The sky above was wide and empty, yet full of unspoken things. He didn't know what would happen next, whether those men would return or whether she would vanish as suddenly as she came. But he knew one thing for certain. His life would never return to the quiet routine it once had. As the morning sun climbed higher, a hawk circled overhead, its shadow sweeping across the land. Somewhere beyond the hills, the echo of hooves stirred once more, faint but growing. The Apache woman's eyes narrowed as she listened. "They are coming again," she whispered. The farmer stepped closer, his jaw tightening. "Then this time," he said, "we face them together." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of dust and danger. The world outside seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what would come next. The wind came from the south, carrying dust and the faint clatter of metal. The farmer scanned the ridge while the Apache woman studied the ground, reading the land with ease. She pointed to a broken patch of brush where someone had forced a horse through in haste. He had never hunted men, never wanted to, but he understood tracks. These riders were not passing through. They were circling and would be back. He felt the weight of it in his chest. She touched the fence rail and whispered that they would use the creek bed to come in low. He looked at the shallow water curling past the cottonwoods and knew she was right. The homestead felt smaller now. The barn, the pen, the narrow cabin window that had once framed peace. They set to work without many words. He led the mare into the barn and checked the latch. She gathered the small things a person needs to move fast, things that tell a story about what they value. She took a pouch of dried herbs, a string of carved beads, and a small bundle wrapped in soft hide. He did not pry. He filled the water barrels and moved the crate that hid the trapdoor a few inches away so the rug would lie smoother. The routine chores of a farmer were now part of a defense. He took down his old rifle and worked the action to make sure it still breathed. She watched him and nodded, then tied her hair back with a strip of leather like a scout readying for a long run. By noon, the prairie heat pressed down and made the air quiver. They ate little, sharing a dry heel of bread and cool water. She told him the riders were not soldiers but men who worked with the reservation agent and a trader who wanted control of the path by the Red Canyon. She had argued against a deal made without the elders. When she would not yield, the trader stirred trouble and a cousin raised a hand against her. That night she left before death found her fire. The farmer listened and felt a steady anger rise, not a hot blaze but a firm coal. He had seen this pattern in town, where words like order and progress were used like ropes. The old American way of homesteads and small ranches was changing, and men with ledgers in their pockets were deciding who belonged. In the afternoon, a wagon rolled along the distant trail toward the trading post, and for a time the rider's approach faded under normal sounds. The woman asked if there were neighbors close by. He said the nearest was an older widow 2 miles north who kept a few goats and a patch of corn. She sold eggs and gossip to the dry goods store and had a steady voice like a bell. He considered sending word to her, but the woman shook her head. Bringing another soul into danger would not keep anyone safe. Still, he saddled the mule and tied a note in plain words for the next time he risked the path. He told her the widow could read and had a kind heart. The woman smiled and said a kind heart can call trouble to it, same as a fire calls moths on a warm night. Toward evening, they walked the fence line together, checking posts and wire. The day's work gave them a rhythm. She showed him a thorn that could cure a fever if boiled. He showed her the shallow spot in the creek where his cattle crossed. She told him how to step on rock and hard ground to break a trail, and he told her where he had hidden seed under the floor for a dry year. There was trust in these small trades, something more than help and not yet a promise. When they came to the cottonwood, he told her how he once swung there as a boy while his mother washed clothes by the bank. She touched the old scar from a lightning strike and said the tree remembered storms and still stood. When they reached the barn, the first rider's shadow cut across the field. He had come alone this time, a scout in a trail coat who wanted to look brave in the quiet hour before full dark. He reined in near the gate and tipped his hat, but kept his hand close to his sidearm. The farmer walked out slow, his rifle at rest but visible. The rider smiled with hard eyes and said he had a message. The reservation agent wanted to make sure the farmer was not harboring anyone who troubled the peace. Peace, the rider said, like it was a coin. The farmer asked what peace meant on a land that had not learned any man's language all the way yet. The rider's smile slipped. He leaned forward and said there was a price on the head of a certain woman, not for what she did, but for the example she set. If the farmer saw her, he should send word to the post. Inside the open door, the woman stood still as the shadow of a fence post, her breath quiet, her eyes on the rider's hands. She could not see his face, but she heard the tone and knew it well. She thought of her mother teaching her to braid, of the elder who had given her the carved beads now tucked in the bundle, of the last night in camp when someone said the young should learn the trader's rules or starve. She measured these memories one against the other and felt a stubborn line set in her bones. When the rider turned and rode off, she let her breath out and looked at the farmer. He looked back and knew that talk would not stop what was coming. He went to town the next morning to buy salt and see what words moved behind the store counter. She stayed behind and ground corn with the flat stone he kept for winter soups. She mended a tear in his shirt with fiber drawn from yucca leaves. She sang under her breath in her own tongue, a low tune that almost matched the steady drag of the stone. While she worked, a young boy wandered up the path with a tangle of fish lines in his hand. He was the widow's grandson and had ridden ahead of his grandmother, who was hauling milk to the trading post. The boy stared at the stranger, and then at the cornmeal in the bowl. The woman smiled and handed him a small piece of baked bread from the coals. He ate, said thank you, and in his simple way told her that men were talking at the post about a bounty and a lesson that would be made in full view. In town, the farmer heard the same talk in grown-up words. The sheriff kept his mouth closed, the way a man does when he has no taste for a fight he knows he cannot win. The trader laughed loud and spoke of law. The reservation agent signed papers at a desk no one could see. The church bell rang and folks paused and then went back to weighing flour and tobacco. One man clapped the farmer on the shoulder and asked about weather and calves, pretending the air did not smell like iron. The farmer bought his salt and set a sack of coffee beans on his shoulder, and as he turned, the deputy stepped into his path with a smooth voice that could have sold snake oil and salvation on the same day. The deputy said men would ride his way tomorrow and asked if he wanted to save trouble. The farmer looked at the deputy's polished boots, then at the dust he himself carried. He said he did not know what the deputy meant and walked out slow and steady, like a man who understood that a quick step draws faster eyes. On his way home he stopped at the widow's gate. She met him with a dip of her chin and eyes that had counted more winters than her hands could mark. He told her little, just enough to make her turn thoughtful. She sent him away with a bundle of dried apples and a short prayer whispered in a voice that did not care who owned which word. Before he left, she pressed his arm and said sometimes a farmhouse is more than wood. Sometimes it is a stand a person takes when that person did not plan to stand. The farmer thanked her and rode on under a sky that looked wide but heavy. Back at the homestead, the woman had drawn symbols in ash near the hearth, quick lines meant to catch the eye of luck and send it running their way. She swept them clean when he entered and asked what the town had said. He told her enough. She listened and then took the small bundle from her bag. She unwrapped it with care. Inside lay a tiny leather shoe, never worn, sewn with blue thread. He understood without words and felt something fold and unfold inside him. She put the shoe away and said she had not come to bring death to another home. He said the same death had been riding this land a long time and did not need her to find doorways. He said a man can step aside forever and never be clear of it. She nodded once, as if that sentence had reached something that lived behind her ribs. As night came down, they worked on a plan. If riders came by the creek, she would wait at the cottonwoods and lead them away if needed, running for high ground where rock would hide her trail. If they came by the ridge, he would stall them at the gate with calm talk, giving her time to slip into the brush behind the barn. They practiced the quiet signals of hands and small sounds. He gave her a hat to shade her face if she needed to move in plain sight. She taught him how to bind a wound with a strip of shirt that would not stick. They sat near the fire and said little else. The flame made a single path of light up the chimney like a thin promise to the sky. To hold the hours, he told her about his father, who had crossed the river with a wagon and 2 cows when the grass was taller. His father had built the cabin with help from a man who wandered through and stayed for one harvest. The man left a story about chasing the horizon and the handle of a broken knife that still lay in a drawer. His mother had planted lilacs that bloomed twice before a frost took them. They had wanted children, but time wove other plans. The woman listened with the care of someone gathering herbs and choosing the right moment to cut. She answered with her own stories, not only of grief, but of light. Of a spring when the river ran full and the salmon came so thick you could hear their bodies talk to one another. Of a winter when the elders told a tale of a coyote who married the moon and learned that love is a circle if you wait. Of a boy who found a white feather on a hunt and tied it to his hair so that bravery might follow him. The farmer thought about circles then, about how two lives can loop and cross before either person knows they are on the same line. Just before midnight, the mule tossed his head, and the mare stomped once. She put a hand on the air and felt it the way a tracker feels the road. Riders were near again. This time there were more of them, and they did not bother to come quiet. The farmer doused the lamp and the cabin sank into soft dark. Moonlight put a thin silver edge on the table, the rifle stock, the curve of the woman's cheek. She moved to the back door without a sound, slid into the shadow of the barn and reached the cottonwoods like a thought crossing a room. He took his place at the front, every breath counted, every nerve listening. The riders halted at the gate. The deputy spoke first, smooth again, asking for water and news. The trader's voice came next, bright with false cheer. The farmer stepped onto the porch and leaned a shoulder against the post as if he were halfway to sleep. He offered water and gave no news. The deputy said a woman had been seen in these parts, and that it was the law to report such things. The farmer said he believed in law but also believed in truth, and truth said a man does not sell a traveler to those who wish to make an example. The deputy's face went still. The trader laughed and said examples are the best teachers. The sheriff was not there. Out at the cottonwoods, the woman lay flat and watched the creek glimmer. A second group of riders slid along the water, aiming to sweep the back of the homestead like a broom. She counted them and touched the pouch at her waist where the carved beads sat warm from her skin. She could take them toward the ridge now and break her own trail to save the farmer. She could also stay and let the men pass, risking a search that would swallow the cabin. Her hand lifted and fell. She thought of the small leather shoe and of the steady silence of the farmer when men tried to turn him aside. The mule brayed once in the barn. One of the water riders muttered and swung off to check the door. The woman slid closer to the trunk of the nearest cottonwood and gathered her legs under her for the sudden rise a deer makes. The deputy stepped up to the porch and took a long look at the farmer's face. He said the land was changing and a person could choose to change with it or be pushed. The farmer said land changes the way a river shifts after flood, not because a paper says so. The deputy's hand settled near his holster without fully resting. A cloud crossed the moon and deepened every shadow. In that breath of dark, the woman rose and moved like a ribbon, drawing the water riders with a rustle she made on purpose in the brush. A man cursed and gave chase. 2 more followed. The trader shouted to hold the gate. The deputy turned his head the slightest bit, and the farmer felt the weight of a choice sink into the ground between them like an iron stake. The sound of pursuit shifted away toward the ridge, and for a few long heartbeats, everything was quiet enough that the farmer could hear his own blood move. Then the deputy looked back at him and said in a voice stripped of smoothness that hiding a fugitive was a serious matter. He gave the farmer one last chance to step aside. The wind tugged at the porch rope and the rope tapped the post like a slow clock. The farmer's jaw tightened. He did not lift his rifle and he did not lower his eyes. The deputy's fingers twitched. The trader's horse stamped and threw its head. Out by the cottonwoods, the woman drew the riders deeper into broken ground, where stone refuses to tell on feet. The night held all of them on a thin line that could snap with one wrong breath. The creek whispered under the silver edge of the moon. An owl called once from the far cottonwood. The deputy began to speak again, and the farmer's grip eased or tightened, he could not tell which. Somewhere behind the barn a shape moved that did not belong to any plan they had made. And the next choice waiting on that porch would decide whose story the land would remember at dawn. The night pressed down on the small homestead, like a living thing. The air was heavy with dust and fear, and every sound seemed to echo louder than it should. The farmer's hand tightened around the wooden post beside the porch. The deputy stood only a few feet away, his eyes sharp, his tone low but cold. The trader's horse pawed at the ground, restless, its metal bit glinting faintly under the moonlight. Somewhere beyond the barn, the Apache woman was still out there, drawing danger away. But how far he didn't know. He only knew one thing: if they caught her, there would be no mercy. The deputy shifted his weight and said, "You're a quiet man, but you'll have to choose a side tonight." His words cut through the dark like a blade. The farmer said nothing. He looked steady, but inside his thoughts raced like a storm. He could lie, pretend ignorance, hand her over, and maybe they'd leave him be. But every part of him rebelled at that thought. Something deep, something older than fear, told him that some things were not meant to be surrendered. The deputy raised his lantern slightly, letting its light sweep across the porch and through the open cabin door. It landed on the table, the half-eaten bread, the 2 mugs. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the trader's grin widened. "Funny," he said softly. 2 cups for one man living alone. The farmer's pulse quickened. He stepped forward, trying to block the view. "That's from earlier," he said. "A neighbor stopped by." The trader chuckled. "Sure, at midnight." "Out here." The deputy's voice grew calm again. "Let's have a look inside." The farmer's shoulders tensed. His rifle leaned just inside the door, within reach but too far to grab fast. He took a slow breath and said, "You've got no right." The deputy smiled thinly. "I've got orders." He stepped toward the threshold. In that moment, the farmer moved sideways, subtly placing himself in the doorway. The 2 men locked eyes, and in that quiet second, it wasn't just about law or orders anymore. It was pride. One man trying to protect what little piece he had left and another trying to prove power. Before either could act, a faint shout came from beyond the barn. A gunshot followed, echoing across the plain. The horses jerked, the trader cursed, and the deputy spun around. The farmer's heart leapt. He knew that sound. She was fighting back. Another shot cracked, then silence. The trader barked orders and 2 men broke off, galloping toward the ridge. Dust rose in the moonlight. The deputy turned back to the farmer, face dark with suspicion. "What was that?" he demanded. "Coyotes," the farmer said, his voice rough. The deputy's eyes narrowed. "You think I'm blind?" He stepped forward again, pushing past. The farmer moved fast. He grabbed the man's arm and shoved him back off the step. The deputy stumbled, his lantern crashing to the ground and flaring up briefly before dying. The world fell into shadow. "That's enough," the farmer said, his voice shaking but firm. The deputy reached for his pistol, but before he could draw, the farmer swung the butt of his rifle down across his wrist. The gun fell into the dirt. The deputy gasped, clutching his arm. The trader, hearing the scuffle, turned his horse and raised his weapon. The farmer ducked as a shot splintered the porch rail beside him. The mare in the barn neighed loud, frightened. The air filled with the smell of powder and smoke. The farmer ran inside and grabbed the spare cartridges from the shelf. He wasn't a killer, but he wasn't helpless either. His father had taught him to shoot when wolves took their cattle, and his aim had always been steady. He stepped to the window, careful to stay in shadow. The trader reloaded under the open sky, shouting to his men. The deputy crawled behind a barrel, cursing. The farmer's jaw clenched. He fired once, hitting the trader's hat clean off his head. The man ducked low, swearing vengeance. Out near the ridge, the Apache woman had led 3 riders deep into the broken ground, where loose shale and rock cut the hooves of their horses. One man's horse stumbled, throwing him into the dirt. She ran, silent as the night, her hair loose, her breath steady. She knew the land like her own heartbeat. She slid down a narrow gully and circled back toward the creek. One of the riders spotted movement and fired, the bullet grazing the side of a boulder inches from her shoulder. She rolled behind cover and waited, counting the seconds between shots. The men's voices grew frustrated. They were hunters in a land that didn't want them. The farmer could see faint flashes in the distance, gunfire against stone. He knew she was still alive. He fired again toward the riders near the creek, driving them back, buying her time. But the deputy, recovering, lunged at him from the side, knocking him against the wall. The rifle clattered to the floor. They grappled in the dark, their boots scraping across the wooden boards. The deputy swung hard, catching the farmer across the jaw. He stumbled but held on, slamming his shoulder into the man's chest. They crashed against the table, overturning mugs and bread. The fight was rough, messy, desperate. 2 men clawing for control, for breath, for what they believed in. Outside, the trader called out, "You're protecting her, aren't you?" "That filthy savage!" The farmer's blood surged. He shoved the deputy away and grabbed the fallen pistol. "Don't call her that," he said through his teeth. The deputy froze for a moment, realizing what that tone meant. "So it's true," he spat. "You've gone native." The farmer's grip tightened. He didn't shoot, but his silence was answer enough. Out by the creek, the Apache woman crept along the edge of the water, listening. The riders had split apart. One was circling wide, another had dismounted. She could hear their boots breaking twigs. She picked up a smooth rock and threw it into the brush on the opposite side. The men turned their guns toward the noise, giving her a few seconds to move. She darted forward, grabbing one rider's dropped knife. When the man spun back, she struck his arm, sending his gun flying. He shouted, stumbling, and she vanished into the trees again, the knife glinting faintly in her hand. The others fired blindly, lighting up the dark for moments at a time. She knew that if she didn't make it back soon, they'd ride straight to the cabin. The farmer stepped outside again, breathing hard, his shirt torn, his lip bleeding. The trader still waited near the gate, shouting threats. The deputy lay half-conscious by the porch, groaning. The farmer raised his rifle, sighting the trader in the moonlight. But just then he heard something else. A faint cry, then hooves fast approaching from the north. More riders, reinforcements. His heart sank. He knew there would be no easy way out now. He backed toward the barn, calling the mare softly. She answered with a nervous snort. He could hear her heartbeat as if it was his own. The Apache woman emerged from the darkness near the cottonwoods, breathing hard. Her face was streaked with dirt, her blanket torn, but her eyes burned with determination. She saw the shapes gathering near the gate and ran to the barn. He saw her coming and motioned for silence. She slipped inside, crouching behind the stalls. Through the cracks in the boards, they both watched as 5 riders joined the trader. They carried torches now. Flames flickered, casting wild light across the land. "We'll smoke her out," one of them said. The trader smirked. "And him too. Let them both learn," the farmer whispered. "If they set the fire, the whole place will go." She looked at him, her face calm despite the danger. "Then we stop them before they light it." He shook his head. "There's too many." She glanced toward the creek. "Not if we use the land." He didn't understand until she pointed to the dry channel that ran behind the barn, an old wash that curved around to the trader's flank. They could move unseen. He hesitated. "They'll kill us if they see." She met his eyes. "They'll kill us if they don't." Together they slipped through the back of the barn, crouching low, the smell of horses and smoke filling their lungs. The night seemed to hold its breath as they moved. Every step was slow, measured. The riders began spreading the torches, setting dry grass aflame. Sparks leapt high. The orange glow painted the sky. The farmer could feel the heat already. They reached the dry wash and crawled through it, rocks scraping against their palms. The fire crackled louder now, the trader's laughter rising with it. The Apache woman stopped and whispered, "When I move, shoot at the torches." He nodded. She climbed the ridge and let out a sharp, piercing cry, a call from her tribe, wild and haunting. The men spun around, startled. The farmer took his shot, striking the first torch from a rider's hand. It fell and went out. He fired again, another torch down. The rider shouted, firing back blindly. The woman darted between the rocks, her knife flashing in the torchlight. One man's horse reared and threw him off. The trader cursed, waving his gun toward the ridge. The fire spread toward the corral fence and the animals panicked. The farmer broke cover, running for the gate, yelling for the men to stop. A bullet tore through the air near his shoulder, grazing wood. He didn't stop. He grabbed the torch from the trader's hand and threw it into the dirt. The trader lunged, swinging the butt of his gun. The farmer caught the blow on his arm and shoved back. They struggled, locked in the orange light of the burning grass. The heat stung his eyes, the air thick with ash. The Apache woman leapt from the ridge, landing hard and knocking one rider down. Her knife cut through the rope he carried, and the man fell backward into the flames. The smell of burning brush filled the valley. The trader snarled, pulling free, and aimed his revolver at the farmer's chest. The 2 men froze, inches apart, the fire between them painting their faces red and gold. The Apache woman turned and saw it. That moment balanced on the edge of life and death. She shouted his name, running forward. But before she reached him, a shot cracked from the ridge, echoing through the dark. The world seemed to stop. The farmer staggered, his breath catching, his eyes wide as the light flared behind him. The trader grinned coldly. The woman screamed as the fire roared higher, swallowing the dry grass, the sky, and everything that still stood between them and the coming dawn. The shot echoed across the burning valley, rolling through the night like thunder. The farmer stumbled backward, clutching his chest, the world spinning around him. Smoke filled his lungs and the scent of burning earth mixed with gunpowder and dust. The Apache woman ran to him, her voice breaking through the noise, calling his name again and again. The trader stood frozen for a moment, his revolver shaking in his hand as if even he hadn't expected to pull the trigger. The flames around them hissed and crackled, climbing the dry fence posts and spreading fast through the grass. She dropped to her knees beside the farmer, her hands trembling as she pressed against the wound. Blood darkened her fingers, but he was still breathing. His eyes met hers, dazed yet calm. "You're alive," she whispered almost to herself. He gave a weak smile. "I'm too stubborn not to be." Behind them, the trader shouted orders, calling for the riders to regroup, but most of them had already scattered, frightened by the fire that now raged out of control. Horses screamed, breaking their reins and bolting into the night. The deputy, still wounded, crawled toward his own horse and rode off without looking back. The Apache woman glanced at the fire and then at the man beside her. "We have to move," she said. He nodded faintly. She wrapped her arm under his shoulder and pulled him up. He gasped in pain but forced his legs to move. Together they stumbled toward the creek where the smoke thinned. Behind them, the barn collapsed in sparks and the sky glowed red. Every step was heavy, every breath a fight. The fire followed, devouring what little he had built over the years. The quiet cabin, the corral, the memories carved into the wood. But he didn't look back. They reached the creek and fell to their knees at the water's edge. The cool air off the stream felt like salvation. She tore a strip from her blanket and pressed it against the wound. He winced but managed a breath. "You're bleeding too," he said, noticing a shallow cut on her arm. She shook her head. "It's nothing." She worked quickly, steady hands moving with instinct born from years of tending the wounded in her tribe. He watched her, even in pain, struck by her strength and the quiet fire that lived in her eyes. When the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, the fire had burned itself to embers. The land was blackened and still. Smoke hung low, curling in ghostly shapes. The traitor and his men were gone, chased away by fear and flame. Only silence remained. The Apache woman stayed beside him, holding his hand as he drifted between sleep and waking. Each time he opened his eyes, she was there. At sunrise, she whispered softly, "The land took back what it wanted, but it spared you." He gave a faint smile. "Maybe it spared us." For 2 days they stayed near the creek, tending wounds and resting. The widow from the north found them on the third morning. She came walking through the ashes with her grandson, her face stern but kind. She had seen the smoke from miles away and knew what it meant. When she reached them, she said nothing at first, only knelt beside the farmer and felt his pulse. "You're a fool for standing against that many men," she said gently. "But a brave one." The Apache woman bowed her head in gratitude. The widow looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "You're safe here, both of you. For now." The boy brought them water and biscuits from the sack. The farmer ate little, still weak, but each day he grew stronger. The widow helped tend his wound, muttering that he was too stubborn to die. When he could finally stand again, he looked at what remained of his home. The cabin was half gone, the field scorched. The fence lay in pieces, the earth scarred. He felt an ache deeper than the wound in his chest. Everything he had built from his father's time, everything that told his story, was gone. The Apache woman stood beside him, her blanket wrapped around her shoulders. "You can build again," she said quietly. He looked at her, his voice rough. "And if they come back?" She met his eyes without fear. "Then we face them again. Together." Her words carried no promise of peace, only truth. The kind of truth that had always ruled the frontier. That survival was not in what you owned, but in what you were willing to protect. The widow helped them move what little was left into her wagon and took them to her homestead. For a while the farmer stayed there, healing slowly. The Apache woman helped with chores, tending goats, mending fences, and grinding corn. The townsfolk whispered, curious about the strange pair living under one roof. Some said the farmer had lost his mind protecting an Indian woman. Others said he had found something no law or land could take away. He didn't care what they said. For the first time in years, his life had meaning beyond the plow and the field. One afternoon, when the sky was pale blue and the air smelled of rain, the farmer sat by the porch carving a piece of wood. The Apache woman joined him carrying a small bowl of herbs. "Your strength returns," she said. "The wound closes well." He nodded. "Thanks to you." She smiled faintly. "Thanks to the spirits who chose not to take you." He chuckled softly. "Maybe they had other plans." She looked at him thoughtfully. Maybe they did. They spoke little about that night, but its shadow lingered. The land around them bore the scars, blackened trees, burned soil, yet wildflowers had already begun to push through the ash. Life, it seemed, refused to give up. The widow said the land was like people, wounded, but capable of healing if given time. The farmer believed her. He planted again, starting small, using what seed he could find. The Apache woman worked beside him, her hands steady, her eyes sharp on the horizon. As the months passed, the rhythm of life returned. The boy came often, helping with chores and listening to the farmer's quiet stories. The Apache woman taught him how to track rabbits and find herbs for medicine. In her presence, even the child could sense something strong and ancient, a spirit that belonged to both the wild and the earth. She and the farmer rarely spoke of what they were to each other, But their silence was filled with understanding. She had lost her tribe, and he had lost his past. Yet somehow in that loss, they had found a place to begin again. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, the farmer walked to the edge of the field. The soil was rich again, dark and alive. The corn had begun to sprout, fragile but determined. The Apache woman stood beside him, watching. "The land forgives," she said quietly, "but it remembers." He nodded. "So do we." The wind carried their words away across the plains, blending with the hum of crickets and the rustle of leaves. When autumn came, they took a wagon into town. People watched as they passed, whispering, but none dared speak. The deputy had left, and the trader had not returned. Some said he'd drowned trying to cross the river with stolen goods. Others said he fled east, haunted by what he'd done. Either way, justice had come by its own road. The farmer sold a small harvest of corn and used the coin to buy lumber and nails. "To rebuild?" the shopkeeper asked. The farmer smiled. "To start fresh." Back at the homestead, he built a small cabin by the creek, with walls strong enough to stand against wind and time. The Apache woman helped him raise the beams, her movements sure and graceful. When the last plank was set, they stood in the doorway together, looking out over the open land. The air was quiet, the world at peace for once. As winter settled, they sat by the hearth one night, the fire crackling low. She reached into her bundle and pulled out the tiny leather shoe she had once shown him, the one she had carried through every trial. She placed it gently on the mantel. "For the child I lost," she said softly. He looked at her, then at the shoe, and whispered, "Maybe that child led you here." She nodded, tears shining in her eyes. Maybe he did. Years later, folks would tell the story of the shy farmer and the Apache woman who stood against the flames. They'd say the land around their cabin grew greener than anywhere else in the valley, as if the earth itself remembered their courage. And though time carried their names away, the story lingered. A tale of love born from loss, of two souls who crossed worlds to build something no fire could destroy. On quiet evenings, when the wind moved through the cottonwoods, it was said you could still hear a woman's soft song carried across the fields, the same song she had once hummed by the fire, the song of life continuing, no matter how fierce the storm. And beneath that same sky, where smoke once rose, the earth healed. The crops grew, and the land, scarred but alive, whispered the story of how two hearts, one Apache, one farmer, turned ashes into a home.